Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true Oregon horror stories that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Pacific Northwest. These are not fictional tales, but real accounts from individuals who experienced the unexplainable in one of America's most enigmatic states. From the isolated Cascade Mountains to the forgotten tunnels beneath Portland, from quiet suburban neighborhoods to remote research facilities lost to time, Oregon harbors darkness that few dare to acknowledge. Each story has been meticulously compiled from witness testimonies, police records, archived documents, and first-hand confessions. What makes these accounts particularly chilling is their verifiable nature. These events left tangible evidence, unanswered questions, and lives forever altered. The people who lived through these experiences carry scars that no rational explanation can heal. If you crave authentic horror content that refuses to provide easy answers, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the unknown. After you hear these disturbing accounts, share your own Oregon encounters or unexplained experiences in the comments below. We read every single one. Now prepare yourself as we uncover 7 cases that prove the most terrifying stories are the ones that actually happened. Let us begin. Edward always told people that Oregon was where you went to disappear. He said it as a joke when he packed up his car and left California behind. But by the time he reached the Cascades, it no longer felt like a punchline. It felt like a promise. He wanted to vanish from a life that had become a string of unpaid bills, failed relationships, and half-finished ambitions. When he found the listing for the cabin, tucked deep in the timberland outside of Oak Ridge, it seemed like the answer to a question he had been afraid to ask out loud. The ad described it as Thornberry Cabin, like the name alone carried its own gravity. Rustic, secluded, no neighbors within miles. The photos showed a weathered A-frame wrapped in thick green, the kind of place where the outside world could not reach you unless you invited it in. The landlord never met him in person. Just a voice on the phone, an email with a rental agreement, and a digital invoice for 3 weeks paid in full. By the time he pulled off the gravel road and saw the cabin appear through the trees, the sun was almost gone and the sky was a dull slate. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of hot metal cooling in the mountain air. There was a quiet here that did not exist anywhere else he had been. No freeway hum, no sirens, no human noise. Just wind in the trees and the occasional crack of some unseen branch giving way. He felt something unclench in his chest for the first time in months. Inside, the cabin was basic but comfortable. One main room with a small kitchen in the corner, a stone fireplace, and a narrow staircase leading up to a loft with a bed under a slanted roof. The place smelled like old cedar and dust, but it was clean. A stack of firewood waited by the hearth, and a handwritten note sat on the kitchen counter. "Welcome, Edward. Key is in the door. Water is from the pump out back. No cell service, but there is a landline for emergencies. Please respect the property, and it will respect you. E." He assumed that initial belonged to the owner, the same man whose name was on the agreement, same as his. He found that strange for half a second, then laughed it off as coincidence. Oregon was full of people with old English names. That was what he told himself as he unpacked his bags. The first few days passed exactly the way he wanted them to. He woke with the early light filtering through the trees, made coffee on the old gas stove, and spent hours at the rough wooden table with his laptop open and his phone powered off in his duffel. He had come here to finally finish the book he had been pretending to write for 3 years. He told himself that isolation was exactly what he needed. No distractions, no excuses. By the end of the 3rd day, He had barely written 10 pages. The words would not come, and every time he tried to force them, his eyes drifted to the window, to the wall of trees pressing up against the cabin. He found himself stepping outside more often, walking the perimeter of the clearing, peering into the forest, like he expected to see something watching him. There was nothing. There was always nothing. That bothered him more than it should have. On the 5th day, he noticed something wrong. It was small, almost insignificant. He had left his mug on the kitchen counter the night before, half full of cold coffee. When he came downstairs, it was in the sink, rinsed, with a sponge resting on the edge of the basin. He stared at it for a long moment. He tried to remember if he had moved it the previous night and simply forgotten, chalking it up to exhaustion. It was possible. He had been up late, scrolling old drafts, searching for some spark of inspiration. Maybe he had cleaned it on autopilot. That explanation held until the 7th day. He woke just after sunrise, the gray light filtering into the loft. He climbed down the stairs, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and stopped at the bottom step. The chair at the table, his chair, was pulled out as if someone had just stood from it. His laptop, which he always closed at night, sat open. The screen was dark, but the lid was undeniably raised. He moved slowly, as if sudden motion might disturb something unseen. His first instinct was to check the door. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was still latched. The windows were all locked, the frame stiff from age. There was no sign of forced entry. On the screen, when he tapped the trackpad, a document was open. It was his draft, the same file he had been working on all week. Only now there were 3 new lines at the bottom, written in a font identical to his own. I am still here. You are not the first. You will not be the last. His heart hammered in his chest. He told himself that this had to be some kind of glitch. Maybe corrupted text from an old section he had deleted. He scrolled through the rest of the document, searching for duplicates, fragments. There was nothing else unusual. He deleted the lines, saved the file, and spent the rest of the day pretending he was not unsettled. He tried to work, but his eyes kept drifting to the corners of the room, to the door, to the ceiling. He kept hearing little sounds that he had not noticed before. The faint creak of the loft floorboards when no one was walking on them. The delicate scrape of something against the outside wall, like a branch being dragged back and forth. When night came, he lit a fire and told himself he was being ridiculous. It was an old building. Of course it creaked. That night, he dreamed the cabin was full of people. He could not see their faces, but he knew they were seated at the table, standing by the windows, lining the stairs. He sat in his chair while they crowded close, cold breath on his neck, whispering things he could not understand. When he woke, his throat was raw, as if he had been speaking for hours. On the 10th day, he found the journal. There was a loose board in the wall behind the bed in the loft. He had noticed it early on, but ignored it, more concerned with his lack of progress than cabin quirks. That morning, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, he tugged at it. The board came away easily, revealing a narrow cavity filled with dust and one small, cloth-bound book. The cover was cracked and faded, the pages yellowed. Inside, the first entry was dated October 3rd, 1983. The handwriting was neat, almost formal. I arrived at the cabin today. It feels like the world has finally gone quiet. This is where I will finish my work. I need distance from everything else. I need silence. The signature at the bottom of the page was his own name. Not his handwriting, but his name. He read for hours. The journal belonged to another man named Edward, who had rented the same cabin 40 years earlier. The entries started just like his own experience. Comments on the isolation, the peace, the hope that this place would finally allow him to complete whatever he had been working on. Then, slowly, the tone shifted. October 10th. I keep finding things moved. The chair, the cup, the lamp. I try to attribute it to forgetfulness, but I feel watched even when there is no one here. October 14th. I woke up to find writing on my page that I do not recall putting down. I would swear it is my hand, but the words are not mine. October 18th. The silence here is not empty. It is full of others. I hear them at night, moving through rooms that do not exist. Each entry felt like a distorted mirror of his own days. The details were different, but the pattern was identical. A creeping sense of being observed, the small changes in environment, the questioning of his own memory. The final entry was dated October 23rd, 1983. I understand now. The cabin is not a place, it is a door. It is open when someone like me comes here. Someone who wants to disappear. It gives us what we ask for. I can hear them better than ever tonight. They are not trying to scare me. They are trying to show me what comes next. I have decided to stay. When the next one comes, perhaps they will read this and understand. Perhaps they will join us. There was no signature. He stared at that last sentence until the words blurred. The logical part of his mind tried to explain it away. Maybe this was some elaborate attempt at horror by a previous tenant. Maybe it was a prank left behind by teenagers. Yet the dates, the aging of the paper, the dust behind the wall, none of it felt staged. He told himself that it did not matter. He would leave. The idea came to him with sudden clarity. He would pack his bags, lock the door, drive back down the mountain road, and find a motel with Wi-Fi and bad coffee and other human beings. The cabin could keep its ghosts, real or imagined. He went downstairs to close his laptop and shut down for the night, intent on leaving first thing in the morning. When he opened the document, there was new text waiting for him at the bottom. Do not run this time. You already stayed. His breath caught in his throat. He checked the file history, the timestamps. The last save had been hours ago, when he had finished fighting with a paragraph and walked away. The new line had no timestamp of its own. You already stayed. He closed the laptop with a snap and unplugged it, as if that simple act could sever whatever was happening. He went to his bag, yanked clothes from drawers, stuffed them inside. He did not bother folding anything. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the door, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. When he threw the deadbolt, the handle did not budge. The lock turned, the chain slid free, but the door itself remained stubbornly fixed in place. He put his shoulder into it. The wood shuddered, but did not open. There was no give, no sense of a stuck latch or warped frame. It felt like pushing against a wall. He moved to the windows. The latches clicked open easily, but when he tried to raise the glass, it would not move. Not even a millimeter. His fingertips went numb from the strain. He backed away slowly, the room suddenly too small, the walls too close. This is ridiculous, he whispered, but his voice shook. The landline sat on a small table near the stairs, its coiled cord a relic from another decade. He lifted the receiver, pressed it to his ear. No dial tone, just a faint, low hiss, like breath on the line. He hung up and picked it up again. Same sound. That night, the voices did not wait for him to fall asleep. They began as a murmur in the walls, a vibration he could feel in his teeth before he could make out words. He sat in the chair by the fireplace, the journal open on his lap, the pages fluttering in a breeze that did not exist. The flames burned low, throwing long, strange shadows across the room. The murmur grew clearer, resolving into overlapping whispers. Some were behind him, some above. Some so close he could have sworn they were inside his own skull. He covered his ears, but it did little. "Do you remember?" one voice asked. It sounded like his own, warped and distant. "You asked to vanish," another voice said, softer, almost kind. "You finished," a third added. "You just do not know it yet." He stood up so quickly, the chair toppled. The journal slid from his lap and landed open on the floor. When he looked down, the page had changed. The neat entries from 1983 were gone, replaced by his own handwriting, his own words. "I came here to disappear. I did not realize that I already had." He did not remember writing that. The ink glistened as if it were still drying. He stumbled back, his heel catching the edge of the rug. He nearly fell, steadying himself on the table. His laptop, still closed, vibrated under his hand. A soft, rhythmic shaking, like something alive trapped inside the metal shell. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The document was still there, but it was no longer his story. Paragraph after paragraph of experiences filled the screen, dozens of voices speaking in first person. Some talked about snowstorms and isolation, others about arguments with loved ones, about deciding to leave everything behind and come up to the cabin for a while. Each one ended the same way. "I decided to stay." Names appeared at the top of each account, but the letters blurred when he tried to focus on them. His own name appeared again and again, scattered through the text in different contexts, attached to sentences he did not remember writing. "I remember arriving here in 1983. I remember coming back after the divorce in 1997. I remember the last time I tried to leave." He slammed the laptop shut. For the rest of the night, he sat in the corner between the fireplace and the wall, his back pressed against the rough wood. He watched the door. He watched the windows. The voices did not stop, but they grew softer, more distant, like a radio station drifting out of range. At some point, he must have dozed off, because when he opened his eyes again, light was seeping through the cracks in the curtains. Morning brought a thin kind of courage. Things always seemed less terrifying in daylight. He told himself that whatever had happened, whatever he had seen, could be explained. Stress, isolation, maybe even gas leaking from the old stove, messing with his head. He was not trapped here. He refused to believe that. He tried the door again. This time it opened with a reluctant groan. Cold mountain air rushed in, sharp and clean, filling his lungs with something close to relief. He stepped outside, half expecting to find the world altered, the trees rearranged, the sky a different color. Everything looked the same. The car sat where he had left it. Gravel crunched under his boots. He unlocked the door, tossed his bag into the passenger seat, and slid behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the second try. The radio crackled, then caught a station halfway through some old song. It felt ordinary, blessedly ordinary. He pulled out of the clearing and onto the narrow dirt road. The trees closed in around him, branches reaching overhead to knit a canopy that blocked out most of the sky. He kept his eyes on the two faint tracks ahead, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. After 10 minutes, the road curved sharply to the left, just as it had when he arrived. He rounded the bend and saw only trees, no continuation of the road, No break in the undergrowth, just a wall of trunks and ferns and moss. He stopped the car, heart pounding, and got out. Leaves rustled under his boots as he walked forward, expecting at any moment for the illusion to break, for the hidden path to reveal itself. There was nothing. He pushed aside branches, scraped his hands bloody against bark, searched for the hard-packed earth of the road. It was gone. He turned around slowly. The cabin stood exactly where it had been, framed by trees that now seemed closer than before. The clearing felt smaller, the air heavier. He realized then that he had never checked a map. He had followed vague directions sent in an email, driven where his GPS had stopped working, trusted that the road would lead him where it was supposed to. He had no coordinates, no physical address, nothing to anchor this place in the real world except a few lines of text on a screen. When he went back inside, the journal was waiting on the table, open to the last page. A new entry had appeared below the one from 1983, the ink still glistening. October 23rd. I tried to leave again. The road is gone. The cabin is all there is now. I understand why they stayed. Out there, I was already disappearing piece by piece. In here, at least, I am something. I am a voice added to the chorus. When the next one arrives, they will read this. They will think they are different. They will not be. He recognized the handwriting this time. It was his. If you asked Edward today exactly how long he was in that cabin, he would not be able to tell you. The days bled into each other, marked only by the length of the shadows and the sound of the wind. Sometimes he thought he heard a car on the road, a distant engine approaching. Whenever he stepped outside to look, there was only the same unmoving forest. Some nights, when the fire burned low and the voices grew strongest, he found himself at the table, the laptop open, his fingers moving across the keys, even though he swore he was not guiding them. He wrote about lives that were not his, about winters he had never lived through and summers in decades he had not been born into. Each story ended the same way. I decided to stay. If you go looking in property records for Thornberry Cabin, you will not find it. The parcel number on his rental agreement does not match anything in the county. The email thread confirming his reservation is gone from his account, replaced by a single unread message from an address with no sender. The subject line is just his name, and the body's empty. Sometimes, in dreams, he is back in his old apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and overdue notices. He is on the phone, listening to a friendly voice explain that the cabin is perfect for someone who wants to get away from everything. He hears himself say yes. He always says yes. The last line in the journal, the one he never remembers writing but finds every time he opens it, is simple. If you are reading this, you have already stayed longer than you meant to. The road will not be there when you turn back. The cabin is patient. It has all the time in the world. The question is not whether you will leave. The question is how long it will take you to admit that you already did. I never met Camilla while she was alive. By the time I first heard her name, she had already been in the ground for 3 months, and I was being told I owned everything she left behind. The call came on a gray March morning, the kind of Oregon day where the clouds sit low enough to feel like you could reach up and smear them across the sky with your palm. I was at my tiny apartment kitchen table in Portland, half awake, scrolling emails and nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. My phone lit up with an unknown number from a small town I had never heard of. Normally, I let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. The man on the other end introduced himself as an attorney from Klamath County. He asked to confirm my full name, my date of birth, and my mother's maiden name. I braced myself for some kind of debt collection pitch. but instead he said very calmly that I had been named in the will of a recently deceased relative. Her name was Camilla. I told him he must have the wrong person. I did not have any relatives named Camilla. My family tree was small and painfully familiar. My mother was an only child. So was I. My grandparents on her side had died when I was in middle school. The few cousins we had drifted off years ago. He explained that Camilla had been my grandmother's older sister. Apparently, there had been a falling out long before I was born. No one ever bothered to tell me that my grandmother had a sister who moved out to the countryside near Crater Lake, bought a farmhouse, became a recluse. She had never married, never had children, and according to the attorney, had left everything to the nearest living blood. That was me. I should have felt lucky. Instead, I felt a kind of reluctant dread. The property, he said, was an old farmhouse on 40 acres of land about an hour outside of Crater Lake. There was some savings, not much, enough to cover taxes for a few years if I decided not to sell. He suggested I come down and see it before making any decisions. Maybe I could fix it up, rent it out, or move there myself. The way he said it made it sound like a fresh start. At the time, my life in Portland did not exactly inspire loyalty. I was stuck in a dead-end retail job, behind on rent, and still recovering from a breakup that had hollowed out more of me than I wanted to admit. The idea of a house that was fully paid off, even a decaying one in the middle of nowhere, felt like an opportunity I would be stupid to ignore. I told him I would come down the next weekend. The drive to the property took me off the main highway, past the usual tourist routes, and onto narrower roads that wound between dark stands of pine. Little by little, signs of other people thinned out. The last gas station I saw was 20 miles back. My cell service vanished somewhere between one bend and the next, the bars flickering away as if someone had reached out and pinched the signal shut. The attorney's directions were precise. Turn left at the rusted mailbox with no name, follow the gravel road for 3 miles, cross the creek, then keep going until you see the fence. The mailbox appeared exactly where he said it would. The gravel road, more pothole than solid ground, clawed at my tires. When I finally crossed the shallow creek and climbed the low hill on the other side, I saw the fence. Beyond it, sitting alone in a clearing surrounded by dense woods, was the farmhouse. It was not the collapsing ruin I had expected. The white paint was peeling, but the structure was intact. The roof looked solid. A wraparound porch sagged a little at one corner, but all 4 posts still stood. The windows were all covered from the inside, but their glass was unbroken. There was a barn off to the left, and a chicken coop long since abandoned, its wire run filled with weeds. The front gate groaned when I pushed it open. A crow watched me from the fence post, head cocked to one side as if weighing my worthiness. The air smelled like wet earth and old wood. The attorney met me on the porch, holding a manila folder and a ring of keys. He was older, with thinning hair and the tired politeness of someone who has had this exact conversation too many times. We went through the legalities, the signatures, the acknowledgments. Then he pressed the keys into my palm and told me, in a careful tone, that my great-aunt had been an unusual woman. Before he left, he said something that stuck with me. He paused at the top of the porch steps, looked back at the front door, and said, "She was very particular about her mirrors." I asked him what he meant, but he only shook his head and walked back to his car. The house was quiet in the way of places that have seen years of human life. And then, suddenly, none. The air inside was still and faintly stale, but not rotten. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The first thing I noticed were the shapes on the walls. Every mirror in the house, and there were many, was covered with black cloth. In the front hall, a long rectangle hung where a hall mirror should be, draped in heavy fabric pinned tightly around the frame. In the parlor, a large oval over the fireplace was cloaked in the same way. Even a small mirror above the bathroom sink was wrapped and tied like a strange, dark gift. At first, I thought someone had died in the house, and the mirrors were covered in some old superstition. I told myself I would take the cloths down later once I had walked through everything. It did not feel right to start by undressing the house like that. The rest of the place was unnervingly orderly. Bookshelves lined one wall of the parlor, filled with neatly arranged volumes. The kitchen drawers were organized with almost obsessive care. Every knife, spoon, and measuring cup had its defined place. On the kitchen table lay a single sheet of lined paper, held down by an unlit candle. The handwriting was small and precise. Do not remove the coverings. Do not let them see themselves. Do not stay after dark if you do. See. I stood there for a long moment, reading and rereading those 3 sentences. The logical part of my brain filed it away as evidence of eccentricity. Maybe she had been afraid of spirits. Maybe she had some mental illness that manifested in rituals like this. There were 100 explanations that did not involve anything supernatural. Still, the paper trembled slightly in my hand as I picked it up. I told myself I would humor her, at least for the first day. I would clean, inventory what was here, and leave the mirrors alone. If I decided to sell the place, the next owner could deal with whatever remained. The upstairs held 2 small bedrooms and a larger room that must have been hers. Each one had at least 1 mirror, and each one was covered in black cloth so tightly there were no gaps, no glimpse of glass beneath. Her bedroom had 3, one above the dresser, one freestanding full length against the wall, and one odd, narrow thing between the 2 windows. The coverings were pinned with small, rusted nails. The only place without any mirrors was the basement. The door to the basement was off the kitchen, half hidden behind a tall cabinet. I almost missed it. The steps were steep and narrow, and the light switch at the top of the stairs did nothing when I flipped it. I used my phone's flashlight to pick my way down, each footstep sending small echoes ahead of me into the darkness. At the bottom, the concrete floor was cold through my shoes. The basement was bigger than I expected, the ceiling low, supported by rough beams. One bare bulb hung from the center, burned out long ago. The smell down there was different from the rest of the house. Damp, metallic, like old pennies and rain-soaked stone. Along the far wall were shelves of glass jars and canned goods, the kind of emergency stash older people keep. Next to them, carefully stacked, were boxes labeled in neat handwriting. Spring clothes, tax records, photos. The back half of the basement, however, was taken up entirely by wooden masks. They hung from nails driven into the concrete wall, rows upon rows of them, stretching from one corner to the other. There must have been over 100. Everyone was carved from the same pale, unfinished wood. Everyone was the same face. The proportions were just slightly wrong. The eyes were set a little too far apart, the nose too narrow and long, the mouth stretched almost to the edges of the jaw. There were no pupils, just smooth, blank ovals where the eyes should be. Each mask had 2 small holes bored near the temples, with pieces of old leather cord threaded through, as if they were meant to be worn and tied in place. A few of them had faint streaks on the cheeks, darker patches that might have been water damage, or something else. I stood there, my phone light swaying slowly across the wall, and felt a prickle crawl up the back of my neck. The air in front of the masks seemed cooler, like standing in front of an open freezer. I told myself I was being dramatic. they were just pieces of wood. My great-aunt had been an artist or a hobbyist with a morbid bent. That was all. On the workbench beneath the masks lay tools, chisels, sandpaper, jars of varnish. There was also a small notebook, its cover stained with what looked like oil. On the first page, in that same precise handwriting, was a single line. They do not like to see their own faces. The rest of the pages were filled with sketches. The same face over and over, from different angles. Sometimes just the upper half, sometimes just the mouth. In the margins, she had written short notes in a cramped, hurried style. Too close to human, eyes farther, smile less. By the time I climbed back up the stairs, the light outside had shifted. The sky seen through the kitchen window was darker than it should have been for mid-afternoon. Thick clouds had rolled in, swallowing what little sun there had been. I checked the time on my phone. I had been down there less than 20 minutes. The sensible decision would have been to leave. I could have driven back to town, found a motel, and come back another day with a friend, or at least during full daylight. But something about the place hooked its fingers into me. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the simple fact that, for the first time in a long while, I was standing inside something that belonged to me. I decided I would stay until sunset, lock up, and head out. No reason to overreact to a bunch of creepy crafts and covered mirrors. The wind picked up around 4. I was in the parlor, going through books, when the first sharp gust slammed into the side of the house. The windows rattled. A loose shingle somewhere on the roof flapped and snapped like a broken wing. Then I heard the tapping. At first it was faint, like twigs brushing the glass. I figured a branch outside was caught in the wind. It grew louder, more insistent. A dry, rapid tapping, like knuckles on a window pane. It came from every direction at once. I moved from room to room, heart rate climbing, listening. In the hallway, the covered mirrors seemed to hum, the fabric lifting almost imperceptibly in a breeze I could not feel. In the kitchen, the sound was strongest near the back door, where a narrow window looked out onto the yard. Its curtain was thin enough that I could see a dark shape beyond it, pressing close. The tapping shifted, turning into a slow drag, as if someone were running their nails along the glass. My rational mind tried to stitch together explanations. Branches, animals, the wind, all together, all at once. Then a voice spoke. It was muffled, distorted by the wall and glass, but it was unmistakably human. It came from just beyond the Yolk's kitchen window, and it sounded like someone had pressed their lips directly against the pane. "Let us see," it said. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I did not move. I did not breathe. The tapping resumed, more frantic now. It was no longer limited to the kitchen. It came from every wall, every window, every covered mirror. It was above me and below me, in the pipes, in the floors. The house vibrated with it. "Let us see," the voice repeated. This time, it sounded like there were more of them, overlapping, out of sync. I backed away from the window, keeping my eyes on the curtain. Its fabric trembled with the force of whatever was on the other side. The black cloths over the mirrors began to flutter, though there was no draft. The nails that held them shivered in the wood. The note on the kitchen table flashed through my mind. Do not remove the coverings. I did not. I wanted to. That was the worst part. Some deep, ugly curiosity inside me wanted to tear the cloth away, to press my face to the glass and see what was asking, to know what shape was making that sound. Instead, I grabbed my keys, stumbled to the front door, and yanked it open. The wind hit me full in the face, carrying bits of dried leaves and dust. The sky outside was a solid sheet of dark gray. The trees around the clearing thrashed, their branches bending like they were trying to uproot themselves. On every window of the house, as far as I could see, something pressed against the glass from the inside. Not hands. Not exactly. The impressions looked like faces pushing forward, features distorted by the barrier between us. The shapes stretched and warped, mouths opening and closing in silent, wordless screams. Wherever the black cloths covered mirrors inside, the window panes aligned with them were clear, as if whatever was trying to get through could not quite find its way there. But the ones without mirrors behind them bulged outward in ripples, as if something inside was leaning with all its weight. I do not remember getting to my car. I remember the engine roaring and the gravel spitting under my tires. I remember the trees blurring into a single dark wall as I flew back down the road. I did not look back. I made it to a roadside motel that night, shivering and wired, with the sound of tapping still echoing in my skull. I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw pale wooden faces with two wide mouths and black, mirrorless eyes. The next morning, I called the attorney and told him I wanted to sell the property. He sighed, said he had expected as much, and then told me something that made my stomach drop. "You cannot," he said. "The will is explicit. The land passes only to blood. It can be transferred within the family, but it cannot be sold outside it." I argued, yelled, asked about loopholes. He said I could let it sit, pay the taxes, or let the county take it after years of neglect. But I could not simply hand it off to someone else. The land was mine. So was the house. So, apparently, was whatever was pressing its face against the glass, asking to see itself. It has been a year since that day. I have not gone back. The tax notices arrive regularly, thin envelopes with numbers that climb a little every time. Sometimes, late at night in my Portland apartment, I catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror and feel a surge of irrational guilt, like I am breaking some rule I never agreed to. Once, when I woke from a nightmare of tapping and whispering, I found a small smear on my bedroom mirror. It looked like the print of a face pressed hard against the glass, then pulled away. The shape of a mouth, too wide, lingered there in fog. I wiped it off and told myself it was condensation, just breath, my own breath. There are days when I think about going back to the farmhouse with a sledgehammer and a can of gasoline, ending whatever is there by brute force. But I remember the way those coverings trembled, the careful neatness of Camilla's handwriting, the 100 wooden faces staring silently from the basement wall. She spent a lifetime carving those masks, a lifetime covering every reflective surface in that house, a lifetime making sure they never saw themselves. I sometimes wonder what will happen when the cloths finally rot and fall, when the nails rust through and the wind slips its fingers under the edges. I do not know what made Camilla write that note on the kitchen table. I do not know what sat outside her windows for all those years, asking to see. I only know that whatever it is still out there, pacing the perimeter of that clearing, waiting patiently for glass and silver to be uncovered. And somewhere in that basement, a wall of identical faces stares into the dark, never quite knowing why they were carved to look that way. Simon always said Portland did not have real ghosts, just echoes. He liked to stand on the Morrison Bridge at night, looking down at the black water, and talk about all the things the city had covered up with coffee shops and murals. I used to roll my eyes at him, but I went along anyway, because Simon had a way of turning his obsessions into gravity wells. If he was into something, You got pulled in whether you meant to or not. By the time he became fixated on the tunnels, I knew it was only a matter of time before something went wrong. It started as a history rabbit hole. He sent me articles about the old Shanghai tunnels under downtown, the stories about sailors dragged through hidden doors in saloons, waking up on ships halfway to Asia. Most of that lore is exaggerated, I know. But there are real tunnels down there. Real bricks and passages and sealed doorways that lead under buildings people drink in every weekend. At first, he stuck to the legal tours. He would come back from them buzzing, talking about how the guides only showed tourist-safe sections, how there were locked gates and bricked arches everywhere they were not allowed to go. It bothered him, having a mystery dangled in front of him and then fenced off with liability disclaimers. I should have recognized that look in his eyes when he said, "There are parts of this city that never came back up." The night everything happened, he texted me around 9. "Found something? Real entrance this time, not on any tour. Come with me." I was already in bed, half asleep, the rain making a steady hiss against my window. I stared at the message for a long minute. Simon had dragged me through enough questionable adventures that I knew how this would go. We would sneak into somewhere we were not supposed to be. I would spend the whole time worrying about security guards and structural collapse, and he would laugh it off and call me paranoid. I told him I had an early shift. That was only half a lie. He tried to guilt-trip me with a few exaggerated sad faces, then finally sent, "Fine. I will document everything. You will be jealous later." The last message from me that night was, "Try not to get arrested." He responded with a photo. It was a brick wall in what looked like a basement, one section partially knocked out, revealing a dark, rounded tunnel beyond. There was graffiti on the bricks, layers of tags and dates. But the opening itself looked fresh, like someone had been chipping away at it recently. Under the photo, he wrote, "This is not on any map. Talk tomorrow." I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. At first, I ignored it, tangled in the heavy, half-aware certainty that nothing good ever comes from calls in the middle of the night. When it did not stop, I fumbled for it. It was not a call. It was a string of messages from Simon. The timestamps crawled across the screen. 11:42 p.m., 12:03 a.m., 12:17 a.m. I had slept through the vibration. The first one was a picture of a concrete corridor, low ceiling, pipes running along the top. My friend's boots were visible at the bottom of the frame, toes pointing into darkness. "You would love this," he wrote. So much older than the tours. The second photo showed a heavy metal door, the kind you see in industrial basements. It had a sliding latch on the outside, not the inside. The paint around the frame was scratched. Why is a door locked from the outside underground? The third message was just text. "There is stuff down here that is not old. New sleeping bags, cans like someone is living here." The fourth, "Hearing something. Might be water or rats." There was a longer gap after that. Then, at 12:17 a.m., there is a room. Doors like the one in the pic, all with locks only on the outside. One is open. There is someone in there. My throat went dry as I read that last one. The follow-up came a minute later. "They are chained. I think they have been here a while. Going to help them. Signal is bad." The final message hit at 12:19 a.m. "They are not alone down here." Nothing after that. I tried calling. The first attempt went straight to voicemail. The second just rang and rang until the call dropped. I called again, this time to 911, my fingers clumsy on the screen. Explaining to the dispatcher that my friend was somewhere under Portland, in tunnels that might not officially exist, sounded insane even to my own ears. I forwarded the photos and messages when they asked, sent them the last GPS location from the image metadata. The officer who met me downtown an hour later had the patient look of someone dealing with another drunk story. That expression faded when he saw the photos. "This entrance, you know where it is?" he asked. I shook my head. He said an old building in Chinatown. That is it. They found the place eventually, following little clues Simon had left without realizing it. A sticker from a specific bar in the corner of one photo, the color of the paint on a basement door in another. I watched them disappear down a set of stairs in a condemned building and felt more helpless than I ever have in my life. Time stretched into something ugly. Every minute that passed without news felt like it was being added to a tab somewhere that I would never be able to pay off. When the officers finally came back up, their faces were pale and drawn. One was carrying Simon's backpack. The straps were frayed, like they had been yanked hard. They did not find him. They followed what they thought was his path. Footprints in dust, scuff marks on the concrete. They found the corridor from the photo, the door with the outside lock, the makeshift camp in a side room. Blankets, food, a few syringes. The air down there was stale and wet, the kind of cold that settles into concrete. There was blood on one wall, a smear about, shoulder height, dragged downward. The lab later said it matched Simon's DNA. The trail led to a section where the ceiling had partially collapsed. Old bricks and broken pipe choked the passage. Beyond the rubble, darkness waited. Too unstable to dig, the officer told me. It looks like part of the tunnel system caved in, if he went through there. He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. They searched for 3 days. Dogs, ground-penetrating radar, maps from the city archives showing where the tunnels should be. Half of it did not match what they were seeing underground. Whole sections were missing, while others existed where there should have been solid earth. They never found a body. When they listed him as missing rather than dead, I held on to that like it meant something. It felt wrong to grieve without a body, wrong to accept that a person I had known for 10 years could just disappear into the underside of a city like smoke. A detective met with me a week later, asked more questions, showed me a folder of grainy black and white photos from the 70s. Faces of men nobody had seen in decades. Urban explorers, according to the files. 3 separate cases, all of them obsessed with the Shanghai tunnels, all of them gone. All last seen somewhere in this part of downtown, the detective said, tapping the map. We think there is a network down there that is not officially documented. People have been using those spaces for a long time, not always for legal things. People like who? I asked. He looked tired. People who do not want to be found. People who need places to put things the rest of us would rather not know about. He closed the folder and lowered his voice. I am going to give you some advice off the record. Stop going down the rabbit hole. Let us handle it. Whoever is using those tunnels does not want visitors. I nodded, but some part of me refused to stop looking. I dug through old newspapers, forums, rumors. There were stories about people hearing screams through drain grates in the middle of the night, about fresh graffiti that appeared in sealed basements. There were posts from anonymous accounts talking about the ones who never came back up. None of it brought me any closer to knowing what happened after that last message. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning, I got a postcard. No return address. Portland postmark. On the front was a stock photo of the city skyline with Mount Hood in the background. On the back, in the cramped, messy handwriting I knew better than my own, were 6 words. Stop looking. I am keeping them safe. There was no signature, just the initial S. I took it to the detective, He examined it, his jaw tightening. Forensics later confirmed that the handwriting was a match for samples they had from Simon's old lease forms. The ink was fresh. The card had been mailed 3 days before. It could be a hoax, the detective said. Someone messing with you. Someone who saw the news. Or it is him, I said. He did not answer. I still live in Portland. I still cross the bridges at night sometimes, watching the water move like something alive in the dark. I cannot go near Chinatown without feeling the hair on my arms stand up. Every alley looks like it could hide a set of stairs leading down. Every access door in a sidewalk makes me think of unlocked latches on the wrong side. People like to talk about the Shanghai tunnels as if they are dead history, curiosities sanitized for ghost tours and bar trivia. I know better now. Whatever is under this city is not done with us. There are whole lives down there. Stories sealed away under brick and concrete, chained in rooms no one was supposed to find. If that postcard really came from Simon, it means he made a choice I do not understand. If it was a cruel joke, then someone else is down there reading his words, watching people like him get close enough to vanish. Either way, when the sidewalks are quiet and the manholes glisten with rain, I catch myself listening for echoes that do not belong topside. I keep my distance, but the tunnels are still there, breathing under everything. My grandmother Dorothy was the kind of woman who documented everything. She kept receipts in envelopes sorted by year, recorded every phone conversation on cassette tapes, and filled filing cabinets with genealogy research that went back 8 generations. When she died, I inherited more than her house outside Salem. I inherited boxes of cassettes, notebooks, and a single audio recording that I wish I had never listened to. She had been living alone for almost a decade by then. My grandfather passed when I was still in high school. And after that, Dorothy threw herself into local history projects. She interviewed descendants of Oregon Trail families, transcribed old letters, and spent hours at the county archives pulling records from the 1840s. She loved the past more than the present. Maybe because the past felt safer, more knowable. When she started calling me in the spring of 2020, her voice carried a strange kind of excitement I had not heard in years. She told me she was recording sounds in her house at night. Not creaking pipes or settling beams. Voices. At first, I thought she was confused, maybe slipping into early dementia. I suggested she get her hearing checked, maybe see a doctor. She laughed at me, that dry, crackling laugh she had, and said, "I am not losing my mind. I have proof." She mailed me a CD a week later. The case was labeled in her careful handwriting. Attic Recordings, April 12/18. I did not listen to it right away. I was busy, distracted, and part of me did not want to hear whatever nonsense she had convinced herself was real. It was not until after the funeral, when I was sorting through her things in that quiet house, that I finally found the CD player and pressed play. The first track was ambient sound. The low hum of the house settling, a distant creak, wind brushing the roof. Then, faintly beneath it all, I heard something else. A voice. No, multiple voices, layered and indistinct, like a conversation happening in another room through a closed door. I turned the volume up and leaned closer. The words were in English, but the cadence was strange, formal, almost archaic. One voice, male and rough, said something that sounded like, "How many days since the crossing?" Another voice, softer, replied, "We do not count days anymore." The recording continued for 11 minutes. The voices came and went, sometimes clear, sometimes lost under static. They asked questions about wagons, about weather, about a place called Barlow Road. One voice kept repeating the phrase, Still walking, always walking. I sat on the floor of her attic, the player balanced on my knees, and felt something cold settle into my chest. Dorothy had done her research. I found her notebook next to a stack of other CDs, each one carefully dated and labeled. Inside, she had written notes in the margins, cross-referencing what the voices said with historical records. She identified them as members of the Meek Cut-Off Party, a group of settlers who took a disastrous detour off the Oregon Trail in 1845. 23 people from that group were never accounted for. They vanished somewhere in the Cascade Mountains and were presumed dead. But Dorothy did not think they were dead. She thought they were lost. One entry in her notebook, dated May 3rd, read, "They do not understand they are gone. They think they are still traveling. When I ask how long they have been walking, they cannot answer. Time does not move for them the way it does for us." She had been talking to them. I found more recordings, dozens of them. In one, Dorothy asked directly, "Where are you now?" The reply came after a long pause, distant and hollow. "Still crossing. We see the ridge, but it never comes closer." "How long have you been crossing?" Another pause, then, "Your time does not pass here." The last recording she made was dated June 10th, 2 days before she disappeared. The file was labeled "Final Conversation." I almost did not play it. My hands shook as I pressed the button, and for a moment I considered throwing the whole CD case into the trash and walking away from whatever this was. But I needed to know. The recording began with Dorothy speaking clearly, calmly, like she was settling into a familiar routine. "I am ready," she said. "Show me where you are." Silence followed, stretching out for nearly a minute. Then came the sound of footsteps. Not hers. Multiple sets, walking in unison, their rhythm slightly off, like people moving through deep snow or across uneven ground. A door opened. That should not have been possible. I had been in that attic a dozen times as a kid. There was no door, just 4 walls, a narrow staircase, and a single window that looked out over the back property. But on the recording, a door opened. The hinges groaned, old and stiff. Cold wind rushed into the microphone, distorting the audio with a low, buffeting sound. Then the voices returned, all at once, overlapping. "Step through. We have held the crossing open." Dorothy's voice, small and breathless. "I see it. I see them all." Her footsteps moved away from the microphone. The wind grew louder, filling the recording with white noise. Then, abruptly, silence. The recording continued for 6 more hours. Nothing but the faint creak of the attic settling, and the occasional gust of wind from a window that, according to the police report, was still latched shut when they found the house empty. The police searched for 3 weeks. No body, no signs of struggle, no indication she had left through the front door. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. The attic window was locked from the inside. They asked me questions I could not answer. Where had she been going? Had she seemed suicidal? Was there anyone she might have been meeting? I showed them the recordings. They listened politely, exchanged glances, and filed them away as evidence of mental distress. The case was listed as a missing person with probable voluntary disappearance, despite the fact that an 81-year-old woman with a bad hip does not simply walk away into the woods and vanish. I kept the CDs. I do not know why. Maybe I thought listening to them again would give me some kind of answer, some clue the police missed. Mostly, though, I just could not bring myself to throw them away. One night, about a month after the funeral, I was alone in my apartment, unable to sleep. I put on the final recording again, the one labeled "Final Conversation," I had listened to it twice before, but this time, I let it play all the way to the end. 6 hours of near silence. Except at the very end, in the last 30 seconds, there was something I had missed. A voice. Faint, distant, barely audible beneath the ambient hum. It was Dorothy. She said my name, not loudly, not in distress. Just a quiet statement, as if she were leaving me a message she knew I would eventually find. Tell him not to come looking. Then nothing. I played it back 4 times, adjusting the volume, pressing my ear against the speaker. It was her. I would know her voice anywhere. The question I cannot answer is when she said it. The timestamp on the recording shows it happened hours after she disappeared, long after the microphone should have been sitting alone in an empty attic. Either she came back and spoke into the recorder without opening any doors or windows, or she said it from wherever she went, and somehow it reached back across the distance. I have not been back to the house since. It sits there still, full of her things, the attic undisturbed. I pay someone to check on it once a month, make sure the roof is not leaking, that nobody has broken in. Every time they send me a report, they mention how quiet it is, how the place feels like it is waiting for something. I still have the recordings. Sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I think about playing them again. I think about going back to that attic with my own recorder, sitting in the dark and asking the same questions Dorothy did. I think about what she saw when that impossible door opened, what made her step through without hesitation, where she is now. But I do not go. Because if Dorothy found what she was looking for, if she finally crossed over into whatever place those voices were calling from, then she is still walking, still crossing. And maybe some trails are not meant to have an end. The settlers from 1845 never made it to the valley. They are still out there somewhere, caught in a landscape that does not move forward, asking how many days since the crossing and never getting an answer. Dorothy joined them. And if I go looking, I know exactly what will happen. I will hear my name on a recording I have not made yet, spoken from a place I cannot reach, telling whoever listens after me the same thing she told me. Do not come looking. Some people get lost in the woods. Some people get lost in time. Dorothy got lost in both. And the voices in the attic are still asking how long it has been since the crossing, still waiting for the ridge that never comes closer, still walking through a version of Oregon that stopped existing 175 years ago. They do not know they are gone. Maybe Dorothy does not either. I worked night security at a pharmaceutical warehouse outside Eugene for 2 years, and there was one rule nobody ever explained. They just told you on your first shift, wrote it in the handbook, and expected you to follow it without asking questions. Building C was off limits between 2 and 4 in the morning. If the alarms went off during those hours, you logged it and did nothing else. You did not investigate. You did not call it in. You just wrote it down and waited for daylight. My supervisor said it was policy. Something about specialized inventory and automated systems that could not be disturbed. It sounded reasonable enough at the time. Most corporate rules do when you need the paycheck. Leonard was my partner on those shifts. He was in his early 60s, with the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. He had been working security at the facility for 15 years, long before I was hired. Long before half the buildings even existed. He knew every corner of that place, every blind spot in the camera system, every door that did not lock properly. But he never talked about Building C. For the first few months, I did not think much of it. The facility was huge, 3 separate buildings spread across a fenced lot backed up against dense Oregon woods. Building A held the administrative offices. Building B was the main distribution center, where trucks loaded and unloaded pharmaceuticals bound for hospitals across the state. Building C sat at the far edge of the property, a squat concrete structure with narrow windows and a single steel door. It looked older than the other two, like it had been there first and everything else was built around it. The cameras covering Building C were always functional, always recording. I checked them a dozen times a shift out of sheer boredom. Empty hallways, fluorescent lights, rows of metal shelving stacked with unmarked boxes. Nothing ever moved in there, except between 2 and 4 in the morning when the lights would flicker. Just once or twice, barely noticeable unless you were staring at the screen. Leonard always noticed. He would sit up straighter in his chair, lean toward the monitors, and watch Building C with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He never said anything. He just watched until the hour passed and the lights stopped flickering. Then he would settle back, pour himself more coffee, and pretend nothing had happened. I asked him about it once, maybe 4 months into the job. It was a slow night, no deliveries, no alarms. Just the two of us and the hum of the security office computers. "What is actually in Building C?" I said, trying to sound casual. Leonard did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the monitors. "Specialized inventory." "Yeah, but what kind?" "The kind you do not ask about." I laughed, thinking he was messing with me. He did not laugh back. "Look," he said, finally turning to face me, "you seem like a decent person. So I am going to tell you the same thing I wish someone had told me when I started. Do not ask questions about Building C. Do not go in there during restricted hours. And if you ever see something on those cameras that does not make sense, you forget it the second your shift ends." "Why? What happens if I do not?" He looked at me for a long moment, then turned back to the screens. "People who ask too many questions do not work here very long." That should have been enough to shut me up. It was not. The incident happened 6 months into my time there, on a Tuesday night in October. The air had that cold, wet bite that comes before the first real frost. Leonard and I were halfway through our shift when the alarm for Building C went off at 2:47 in the morning. The protocol was clear. Log it, do nothing. But this time, Leonard stood up. "Someone is in there," he said. I glanced at the monitors. The hallways were empty. The cameras showed nothing but the usual rows of shelving and closed doors. "Cameras are clear," I said. "The cameras never show them." The way he said it made my stomach drop. Not it. Them. He was already moving toward the door, pulling his jacket on. I grabbed his arm. "Leonard, we are not supposed to go in there. You know that." He looked at me, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something close to fear in his eyes. "I know. But if someone is in there during restricted hours, they are not coming out the same way they went in." "What does that mean?" He did not answer. He just pulled free and walked out into the cold. I should have stayed in the office. I should have called the supervisor, followed protocol, let someone else deal with it. Instead, I followed Leonard across the dark parking lot toward Building C, my flashlight beam cutting weak arcs through the mist. The steel door was closed, but not locked. Leonard pushed it open slowly, and the smell hit us immediately. Antiseptic and something else. Something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in a warm room. The hallway inside was exactly as it appeared on the cameras. Fluorescent lights, metal shelves, concrete floors. Empty. But the air was different. Heavier. It pressed against my ears like we had descended into a basement, even though we were on ground level. Leonard moved forward, his flashlight scanning the shelves. I stayed close, my pulse hammering in my throat. We passed rows of boxes, all unlabeled, all sealed with heavy tape. The deeper we went, the colder it got. At the end of the main corridor was a door I had never seen on the camera feeds. It was heavy, industrial, with a small window of reinforced glass at eye level. Leonard stopped in front of it, his hand hovering over the handle. "Do not open it," I whispered. He looked through the window instead. Whatever he saw made him step back so fast he nearly knocked me over. His face had gone pale, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "We need to leave," he said. "Right now." "What did you see?" "We need to leave." He grabbed my arm and pulled me back toward the entrance, moving faster than I thought a man his age could move. We were almost to the door when the lights went out. Not flickering, not dimming. Just gone all at once, leaving us in absolute darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. When the beam finally clicked on, it caught something at the far end of the hallway. A figure, tall, thin, standing motionless in the center of the corridor. It was too far away to make out details, but the posture was wrong. The proportions were wrong. The way it stood, perfectly still, like it was waiting. Leonard shoved me toward the door. "Go, now." We ran. I do not remember getting back to the security office. I remember the cold air hitting my face, the sound of our boots on wet pavement, the way my lungs burned. I remember slamming the office door behind us and locking it, even though that made no sense, even though nothing with a key could keep out whatever we had just seen. Leonard collapsed into his chair, his face slick with sweat. I stood by the monitors, watching the feeds from Building C. The lights were back on. The hallways were empty. Nothing moved. "What was that?" I said. He did not answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, drained of everything. "They have been in there for 5 years. The company put them there. They are not getting out." "Who? Who are you talking about?" "Test subjects. Volunteers, they called them. Homeless people, mostly. Paid them to try an experimental drug. It went wrong, real wrong. 12 people. They locked the building down and covered it up." I stared at him. That is insane. If that were true, someone would have found out. There would have been an investigation. Leonard laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You think this company does not know how to bury things? You think anyone cares what happens to people nobody's looking for?" "But the deliveries. I have seen trucks go to Building C. Food, medical supplies, enough to keep them alive. They are still in there." "Then what did we just see?" He looked at me, his eyes hollow. "I do not know. Maybe what they became." We sat in silence for the rest of the shift. When morning came, we filed our reports. Unauthorized entry, possible malfunction, no individuals found. Standard language. 2 weeks later, Leonard took an early retirement package. The terms were generous, contingent on a non-disclosure agreement he signed without reading. I quit a month after that. I tried to forget. I moved to Portland, found a different job, told myself that whatever I had seen that night was just stress and exhaustion and an overactive imagination. Then, 3 months after I left, Leonard called me. "Went back," he said. His voice was quiet, distant. I broke in. 3 in the morning. I had to know. "Leonard, why would you do that? Building C is empty. Completely empty. No shelves, no boxes, no equipment. It is just bare concrete, like it was never used for anything." I did not know what to say. "But I found something," he continued. "In one of the back rooms, 12 hospital bracelets, old ones. Names and dates from 5 years ago. I am sending them to you. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Inside were the bracelets, exactly as he described. 12 names I did not recognize. Dates from October 2016. At the bottom of the envelope was a handwritten note in Leonard's careful script. They were real. We did not imagine it. Whatever happened to them, it was not natural. And they are still somewhere in that building, even if we cannot see them anymore. I have not heard from Leonard since. The warehouse still operates. Building C is still there, lights on, cameras running. And somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the world is at its quietest, the lights still flicker. I wonder if anyone else has seen what we saw. I wonder if they were told the same thing Leonard told me. Do not ask questions. Do not investigate. Forget what you see. I wonder how many others are walking around with that weight, knowing something is wrong but having no way to prove it, no language to explain it. All I know is this: whatever is in Building C, it is still there, and it is still waiting. For 3 years, I lived next door to Viola, and I thought she was just a lonely old woman who baked too many cookies and talked too much about the past. She lived on the other side of a duplex in Bend, one of those older buildings where you can hear your neighbors sneeze through the walls. I moved in during the summer of 2017, fresh out of college, working my first real job and trying to pretend I had my life together. Viola was there the day I arrived, standing on her porch with a plate of oatmeal cookies wrapped in plastic. She was small, probably late 70s, with white hair pinned back in a bun and the kind of floral dress that looked like it belonged to a different decade. Her smile was warm, her voice soft and grandmotherly. "Welcome, dear," she said, handing me the plate. It is so nice to have someone young next door again. The last tenant was hardly ever home. I thanked her, made small talk about the neighborhood, and went inside to unpack. Over the next few weeks, she became a fixture in my routine. She would knock on my door with leftovers, invite me over for tea, ask about my family. It was comforting, in a way. I had moved to a city where I did not know anyone, and Viola filled a gap I had not realized was there. She talked about her late husband constantly, how he had understood her hobbies, how patient he had been, how much she missed having someone to share things with. She asked about my family with an intensity that felt a little intrusive, but not alarming. Did I have sisters? She always wanted daughters. Was I close with my mother? Family was so important. I answered politely, kept things vague. It felt rude to shut her down completely. In the second year, she asked me for help moving boxes in her basement. Her knees were bad, she said, and she could not manage the stairs alone anymore. I agreed, partly out of politeness, partly out of guilt for how often I had declined her invitations for dinner. The basement was cleaner than I expected. No cobwebs, no musty smell, just concrete floors and wooden shelves lined with plastic storage bins. They were labeled in neat handwriting, each one marked with a woman's name and a year. Jennifer, 1986. Caroline, 1993. Melissa, 2001. My collection? Viola said, running her hand along the edge of one bin. I have been gathering for decades. I assumed she meant photos or letters, memorabilia from people she had known. The bins were heavy when I lifted them, contents shifting inside with a dull, muffled sound. I did not ask what was in them. It felt like prying. She thanked me with another plate of cookies. The smell started in the summer of 2019, during a brutal heat wave that turned the duplex into an oven. At first, I thought something had died in the walls. A rat, maybe, or a bird trapped in the attic. It was sweet and rotting, thick enough to taste. I knocked on Viola's door to ask if she was noticing it too. She nodded, wrinkling her nose. Rats in the crawl space. I have an exterminator coming tomorrow. The smell lingered for 3 weeks, gradually fading as the weather cooled. I stopped thinking about it. Then a woman went missing. It was all over the local news. A 23-year-old graduate student from Corvallis, last seen jogging near a nature trail about 50 miles away. The search went on for days. Volunteers combed the woods. Police put out appeals for information. I watched the coverage with the same detached concern most people have for tragedies that happen to strangers. Viola watched it differently. She sat in front of her television with the volume turned up, leaning forward in her chair. When they showed the missing woman's photo, Viola murmured, "Such a shame. She looked like a sweet girl." Then, quieter, "She reminds me of my collection." I glanced at her, confused. "Your collection?" She smiled at me, that same warm, grandmotherly smile. "Yes, dear." She has that look about her. It was an odd thing to say, but I brushed it off. Old people said strange things sometimes. I went back to my apartment and did not think about it again, until the police showed up. It was early morning, just after 6. I woke to the sound of heavy boots on the porch and voices speaking in low, clipped tones. I looked out my window and saw 3 patrol cars parked in front of the duplex, their lights off, but their presence impossible to ignore. Officers were knocking on Viola's door. She answered in her bathrobe, looking small and confused. They showed her a piece of paper, a warrant. I watched from behind my curtain as they went inside. It took less than an hour for the first officer to come back out, his face pale, his hand pressed to his mouth. He leaned against the porch railing and sucked in deep breaths like he was trying not to be sick. Another officer radioed for backup. Then another. Within 30 minutes, the street was full of cars, and yellow tape cordoned off the entire property. Forensics arrived. Then the news vans. I stood in my doorway, shaking as a detective approached and asked if I had noticed anything unusual about my neighbor. I told him no. I told him she baked cookies and talked about her husband and seemed harmless. He nodded, wrote something down, and told me I would need to stay somewhere else for a few days while they processed the scene. It was not until that night, sitting in a motel room with the television on, that I learned what they found. 17 bodies. All women, aged 19 to 30. Some had been there for decades, buried in the crawl space beneath the basement, wrapped in plastic and buried in shallow graves. Others were more recent. The missing graduate student from Corvallis was among them. Viola had been killing women for 35 years. The news showed photos of the victims, names I did not recognize, faces that stared out from the screen with frozen smiles. The reporter explained that Viola had confessed within hours of her arrest, showing no remorse, speaking about the women as if they were possessions she had collected and preserved. "They are still with me," she told investigators. "That is what matters." I thought about the bins in her basement, the labels, the names and years. I had moved those bins. I had lifted them, felt the weight shift inside, set them on shelves, and never once asked what was in them. I had touched the containers that held pieces of women Viola had murdered, women whose families had been searching for them, women who had been reduced to trophies in a basement I had walked through without suspicion. I thought about the cookies she baked in a kitchen that was 20 feet away from where she kept her victims. I thought about the tea she served me, the conversations we had, the way she smiled when she talked about wanting daughters. The trial was brief. Viola was declared competent to stand trial despite her age. She pleaded guilty, described each victim in detail, explained how she had chosen them. "They all reminded me of the daughter I never had," she said in court, her voice steady and calm. She was sentenced to life without parole. I moved out of the duplex the day they let me back in. I did not pack carefully. I threw everything into boxes and bags and left half of it behind. I could not stand to be in that building another night, knowing what had been happening on the other side of the wall while I slept. For months afterward, I woke up in the middle of the night, thinking about the smell from the summer. The sweet, rotting smell I had convinced myself was rats. It was not rats. I thought about all the times Viola had asked me to come over, to sit in her living room, to stay for dinner. I thought about how easily I could have become one of the names on a bin, another woman who reminded her of the daughter she wanted. I testified at her sentencing hearing. The prosecutor asked me to describe what kind of neighbor she had been. I told the truth. She was kind. She was generous. She seemed normal. That was the worst part. There were no signs, no red flags I could point to and say, I should have known. She was just an old woman who lived next door, who baked cookies and watched the news and kept a basement full of the dead. I still live in Oregon, though not in Bend. I moved to a different city, a different apartment, a place with thin walls where I can hear my neighbors argue and laugh and live their loud, ordinary lives. It is comforting in a way, knowing they are real and alive and messy. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Viola sitting in her living room, surrounded by photo albums and memories, talking about her collection like it was something precious. I think about the women who disappeared, one by one, over the course of 35 years, and how many people must have walked past Viola on the street, sat next to her at the grocery store, smiled at her in passing, and never once suspected. Monsters do not announce themselves. They do not wear signs or speak in riddles. They bake cookies and ask about your family and live right next door, patient and smiling, waiting for the moment when you stop paying attention. I did not stop a monster. I lived next to one for 3 years, helped her move boxes, ate her food, and never saw what was right in front of me. 17 women are dead because people like me did not see. And I do not know how to live with that. Most people who talk about the Northam case start with the night the search team found the empty research station in the Wallowa Mountains. I have to start a little earlier than that, because my connection to it did not begin with headlines or documentaries. It began with a cardboard box my mother handed me after my grandfather Reginald died, and with 4 names written in black marker across the lid. Reginald, Margaret, Alfred, Sylvia. I knew my grandfather had been a psychologist at Oregon State University in the 70s. I knew there had been some kind of incident during a field study that ended his academic career. It was one of those things adults whispered about around holidays and then changed the subject when kids got too curious. By the time I was old enough to ask directly, Reginald would just wave me off and say the lawyers told him not to talk about it. When he died, the lawyers were gone, and so was his fear. All that was left was the box. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, photocopies of university memos, and a stack of photocopied journal pages. On the very top was a photo I had never seen before. My grandfather standing in front of a squat concrete building half buried in snow, his arm around a woman I recognized from family albums as Margaret. On the back, in his shaky handwriting, he had written, "Last clear day, Wallowas, 1974. The clippings told the official story. 4 researchers from OSU, Reginald Northam, neurologist Margaret Fieldstone, graduate assistant Alfred Dunstone, and technician Sylvia Moorfield traveled to a remote research facility in the Wallowa Mountains in December 1974 to conduct an 8-week study on sensory deprivation and group dynamics in isolation. Supply flights checked on them twice. On the third visit, in mid-January, the station was found abandoned. Food left half-prepared, equipment still running, no signs of struggle. A massive search followed. No bodies, no footprints, no clear explanation. The story faded over the years, replaced by fresher tragedies. Locals turned it into a campfire tale about the 4 who walked into the mountain and never came back. The papers in the box were what never made it into the news. The first pages were copied from my grandfather's research proposal. He wrote about exploring the boundaries of individual consciousness in group settings under sustained isolation and testing hypotheses regarding collective perception in sensory-minimized environments. That was the official language. Buried in a paragraph near the end was the part that made my skin crawl. We propose that, under certain conditions, consciousness may not be bounded by individual neurology, but instead may access deeper shared structures. Prolonged isolation in an environment of minimal external stimuli may thin the barrier between subjective minds and perhaps between mind and environment itself. The journal's pages were not his. They belonged to Margaret. Her handwriting was tight and slanted, the ink sometimes smeared where her hand must have brushed it while writing. The first entry in the stack was dated December 3rd, 1974, 3 days after they arrived at the station. "First session in the deprivation tank today," she wrote. "Standard parameters. 90 minutes per subject. Full darkness, white noise. Baseline expectation. Typical reports of drifting, disorientation, episodic memory replay. Actual results. All 4 of us reported the same image. A tunnel, earthen walls, faint light ahead. Reg insists it is coincidence. I am not so sure." The next few entries charted a slow escalation. By December 9th, she was noting identical phrases appearing in their post-session interviews. Alfred used the term, "the hollow below us." 20 minutes later, without prompting, Sylvia described a hollow place beneath the foundation. Neither heard the other's report. Reg is excited. I am uneasy. We are here to study isolation, not shared hallucinations. The entry from December 15th was the first time she mentioned the sound. Tonight, all 4 of us were woken by a vibration, like distant machinery or low chanting. The floor seemed to hum. Checking the instruments in the morning, Alfred found a brief spike in the seismograph. No recorded activity in the region. We are alone on these ridges. Yet something moved under us. The official logs from the supply flights were clipped to that page. The pilot's notes after the first visit were mundane. Team seemed fine. Supplies transferred. Weather clear. The second visit, on January 5th, was different. Something is off. Margaret looked like she has not slept in days. Asked if anyone wanted to come back early. Reginald refused on behalf of all of them. Said they were on the verge of a major breakthrough. When I pressed, he smiled and said, "We have made contact." Did not elaborate. Requesting someone from the university follow up. Nobody did. Winter storms made ground travel impossible. The third flight did not make it out until January 15th. That was the day the pilot found the station open and empty. Margaret's last full entry was dated December 28th. "We found the entrance today." That is how Reg phrased it. "We were in the equipment room when the hum started again. It rattled the beakers on the shelves, made the light fixtures buzz. Alfred traced it with his seismic gear, triangulating the strongest point. A hatch in the floor we had assumed was just access to piping. We pried it open. There is a ladder down into a natural shaft. We dropped a flashlight on a rope. It swung over open space. Rock walls, damp and marked with something. Carvings? Root patterns? It is hard to tell from here. Reg is convinced this is what we have been picking up in the tank. They are not visions, he says. They are impressions from below. We have been listening. Now we can go meet them. I do not like the way he says them. But the worst part is, when I stand over that opening, I feel something listening back. The final page from Margaret was barely legible, the lines shaky. No date, just a short paragraph. Reg says we go down tonight, all together. No more split sessions. He says whatever is under us has been waiting a very long time for someone to answer. I have considered refusing, but every time I sit alone in the dark, I feel pulled toward the hatch. I hear voices that sound like mine and not mine, whispering that we have already gone, that this is just us remembering the moment. If anyone finds this, understand. We did not go because we were forced. We went because something in us recognized something in it. I am afraid that might be worse. That was as far as the copies went. For a long time after reading them, I told myself this was just family mythology, my grandfather feeding his own legend. Maybe he had exaggerated. Maybe he had let the isolation break him and dragged everyone else into his delusion. It was easier to think that than to believe there was actually something under that concrete building drawing people down. Then I found the last item in the box. A photocopy of a report dated March 2019, almost 45 years after the disappearance. The letterhead belonged to a private search and rescue contractor hired by an anonymous client. It described a team who had located the remains of the old research station foundation, now mostly collapsed. The concrete hatch Margaret mentioned was cracked open. The ladder below rotted away. Ropes had been dropped, and a small team had descended into a cavern roughly 200 feet down. They found equipment too corroded to function. An old reel-to-reel tape recorder half fused to the rock by mineral deposits, and something splashed across one wall that tested as biological but did not match any known animal in the database. They also found a message, scratched into the stone just above the old ladder mount. 4 words in blocky, desperate letters. We went, do not follow. Underneath, faint and half eroded, were what looked like initials. RMAS. The report concluded with a recommendation. Site is unstable and should be sealed. Acoustic anomalies recorded during descent. Team members reported hearing voices corresponding to their own internal monologues, but out of sync. Possible psychological effect of echo refraction in chamber. Further exploration not advised. When I finished reading, my hands were numb. I have never been to the Wallowa Mountains. I have never stood over that cracked hatch or heard whatever hums underneath. All I have are copies of someone else's words and a photo of my grandfather smiling in front of a building that no longer exists. But there are nights when I wake up with the intense, irrational certainty that I have been somewhere, underground, in a room too large for my flashlight beam to find the walls, listening to something breathe in time with my heart. In those dreams, I am holding someone's hand, and we are both laughing and terrified. And a voice that is mine and not mine is saying, "We already did this. We are just remembering." I do not know if my grandfather found what he was looking for in those mountains. I do not know if he dissolved into some collective mind, or fell down a shaft and broke his neck, or walked until the cold took him. The rational part of me says people do not just disappear into rock. Bodies leave traces. But I have seen the way institutions close ranks, how reports vanish, how an entire experiment can be reduced in official history to a single neat sentence. 4 researchers lost in an accident during inclement weather. Every now and then, An article about the Northam case makes the rounds online. People debate whether it was a cover-up, a cult, or just a tragic misadventure. Conspiracy forums spin elaborate theories about underground facilities and government mind control projects. Most of it is noise. None of it touches the quiet dread in Margaret's final words. We did not go because we were forced. We went because something in us recognized something in it. There is a particular kind of horror in the idea that the thing you fear is also the thing you secretly want. That given the right door, the right pressure, you would walk through willingly. I keep the box in the back of my closet. Some nights, when the house is very still, I swear I can feel a vibration through the floorboards that is not traffic or plumbing or the neighbor's washing machine. A low, patient hum, like something very far below, is waiting for someone to listen. I tell myself it is nothing. Old pipes, an overactive imagination, echoes. Then I remember the words carved into stone deep under a mountain my family will never stop whispering about. We went. Do not follow. And I lie very still, pretending that warning was meant for somebody else.